On the morning of April 14, 1912, in the first-class dining saloon of the RMS Titanic, stewards laid white linen and polished silver for a breakfast. None of these passengers knew would be their last. John Jacob Astor, the richest man aboard, ate here. So did Benjamin Guggenheim. Number 19 on this list was a delicacy so prized that only the wealthiest tables ever saw it. Number 7 was something most Americans had never tasted. And number 3 tells you everything about how the other half lived and died. These 25 foods were served fresh that quiet Sunday morning, hours before the iceberg. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down what Titanic's first-class passengers actually ate on their final morning. Number 25, stewed prunes. It sounds like the last thing a millionaire would touch, but the very first item on Titanic's first-class breakfast menu was a bowl of dark, wrinkled prunes, stewed soft in their own syrup. In 1912, a proper morning began with fruit that did you good, and the Edwardian obsession with digestion put prunes on the finest tables in the world. Wealthy men who spent their lives at 10-course dinners depended on this humble fruit to keep them regular at sea, where seasickness and rich food waged war on the stomach. The prunes came dried in wooden crates from California and France, plumped back to life overnight in the galley. Nobody bragged about them. But before the caviar of the evening and the oysters of the night, the richest people alive started their final day with a bowl of stewed prunes. Number 24, Quaker Oats porridge. Below the fruit came the cereals, and the most familiar was a steaming bowl of Quaker Oats. That round-faced Quaker on the box was already a household name by 1912, and White Star stocked the brand because their passengers trusted it. The oats were boiled slow until they turned creamy and thick, then served with cold cream poured over the top and a scatter of sugar. English passengers ate it from habit. Americans ate it because it reminded them of childhood. The oats cost pennies a pound even in the ship's massive stores, but poured from a silver jug in a room with crystal chandeliers. Plain porridge became something else entirely. Simple food, served like royalty. Number 23, boiled hominy. Here was a taste of home for the Americans. Hominy, dried corn kernels, soaked in lye until the hulls slipped away, then boiled into a soft, white mush, was a Southern and Midwestern staple. White Star put on the menu specifically for its American clientele. Titanic was sailing to New York, and many of her richest passengers were Astors and Wideners returning to the States. A Bostonian could sit in a dining room built by an English shipping line and eat the same white hominy his grandmother served on a farm porch. It was bland, gently sweet, and soft enough to eat half awake. Some took it with milk and sugar, others wanted it savory, with butter and salt. Either way, it was a small kindness from a company that understood exactly who was paying the fare and what those people wanted to taste 4 days from land. Number 22, puffed rice. This was the space-age breakfast of 1912. Puffed rice had appeared only a few years earlier, invented by a scientist named Alexander Anderson, who figured out how to explode rice grains with steam pressure until they swelled up light and crisp. When it debuted at the 1904 World's Fair, they literally called it food shot from guns and fired it into the crowd from cannons. By the time Titanic sailed, puffed rice was the fashionable, modern thing to serve, a cereal that belonged to the same confident new century as the ship herself. Passengers who thought of themselves as forward-looking chose it precisely because it was new. It arrived airy and weightless, snapping under cream and dissolving the moment it touched the tongue. There was something fitting about the most advanced ship ever built, serving the most advanced cereal ever invented, both sold as unsinkable ideas. Number 21, buckwheat cakes. Now the griddle came into play. Buckwheat cakes were thin, dark, nutty pancakes cooked to order on the galley's flat iron, and about as American as breakfast got. The batter was raised overnight with a bit of yeast, so it turned faintly sour and tender, then poured out in rounds that bubbled and browned in seconds. A stack arrived hot enough to melt the butter on contact, ready for a flood of syrup or a drizzle of honey. But on Titanic, they were dressed up, served on warm plates in a room paneled in oak, eaten by people who had almost certainly grown up eating the same cakes at kitchen tables before they became rich. That was the strange magic of this breakfast. It took the food of ordinary American mornings and framed it in gold. Number 20, baked apples. The smell alone must have filled the saloon. Whole apples, cored and stuffed with sugar and a whisper of cinnamon, baked until the skin split and the flesh collapsed into something like warm applesauce, still holding its shape. A baked apple in 1912 was homey, the kind of thing a nanny made for a child who was ill. But on the finest liner in the world, it became an elegant end to the fruit course, served warm with cream pooling around the base. For a passenger easing into a long, idle day at sea, a baked apple was gentle and unhurried. Nobody eating one that Sunday could have imagined that many of them had fewer than 18 hours left to live. The apple was warm. The room was warm. The world still felt entirely safe. First pattern break. Here is where the truth about this breakfast gets heavy. There was not one Titanic. There were three, stacked one on top of another, and they ate in three completely different worlds. While first class lingered over baked apples and puffed rice beneath a dome of frosted glass, the more than 700 souls in third class ate oatmeal, smoked herring, and bread with marmalade in a plain room near the waterline. And below even them, in the roaring heat of the boiler rooms, the stokers who kept the ship alive gulped down whatever they could between shifts. The galley that produced this first-class breakfast was a factory, feeding roughly 2,200 people 3 or 4 times a day. But the food that reached your table depended entirely on the ticket in your pocket. And that same rule, it would turn out, decided who reached a lifeboat. Number 19. Yarmouth bloaters. This was the item only the wealthiest tables ever saw. Yarmouth bloaters were whole herring caught off the east coast of England near Great Yarmouth, salted lightly and cold smoked over oak until the skin turned a burnished coppery bronze. Unlike ordinary smoked fish, bloaters were smoked whole and ungutted, which gave them a deep, gamey, almost cheese-like richness that fish lovers prized and everyone else found overwhelming. Serving them was a statement. It said this dining room could offer you the specific regional delicacy of an English fishing town, plated with silver tongs, thousands of miles from where the fish were landed. To an English aristocrat, a bloater at breakfast was home. To a curious American millionaire, it was proof that on this ship you could have absolutely anything. Number 18. Finnan haddock. If the bloater was English, the Finnan haddie was proudly Scottish. This was haddock split and cold smoked over green wood and peat near the village of Fundon, south of Aberdeen, until it took on a pale golden color and a mellow smokiness, far softer than the bloater's punch. On Titanic, the galley poached it gently in milk, which drew out the smoke and left the fish flaking apart in tender, buttery sheets. Served in a shallow dish with the warm milk still pooled around it, Finnan haddock was one of the most beloved breakfast fishes of the Edwardian upper class, mild enough for the timid and refined enough for the connoisseur. Smoked in Scotland, iced down for the crossing, and plated in the middle of the Atlantic, that single dish carried an entire coastline across the ocean. Number 17. Grilled mutton, kidneys, and bacon. Now we reach the food that separated the Edwardian rich from everyone who came after. Grilled kidneys were a breakfast delicacy in 1912, and the wealthier the house, the more likely they appeared. The kidneys, taken from young sheep, were split, skewered flat, and grilled fast until the outsides browned and the inside stayed pink and yielding. Paired with rashers of crisp bacon, they delivered a deep, iron-rich, almost livery flavor that men of the era considered fortifying, the proper fuel for a day of business and cigars. A passenger like Major Archibald Butt, military aide to the President of the United States, would have recognized this plate instantly as the breakfast of a serious man. To modern eyes, organ meat at breakfast seems strange, but a century ago, kidneys and bacon meant you had arrived. It was the taste of a certain confidence, the confidence of men who believed nothing bad could ever happen to them. Number 16. Watercress. It seems too small to mention, a handful of dark peppery leaves in a chilled dish. But watercress on the Titanic was a quiet flex of pure freshness. The Edwardians were obsessed with it. They believed it purified the blood and sharpened the mind, and they ate it by the bunch. To have crisp, living green leaves available on the fourth morning of an ocean crossing, when fresh produce was the first thing to wilt and spoil, was a small miracle of provisioning and refrigeration. The galley kept it cold and damp, so it arrived snapping fresh, its peppery bite cutting clean through the richness of the kidneys and fish. Even a weed, essentially, was babied so the wealthy could feel the crunch of something green. Number 15. Cornbread, another nod across the Atlantic to the Americans. Golden, crumbly cornbread, baked fresh in the galley ovens and served warm, meant something specific to the passengers heading for New York. In the American South and Midwest, cornbread was daily bread, the honest food of farmhouses and church suppers. But sliced warm beside imported French honey in a first-class saloon, it became a bridge between two identities, the plain American upbringing many of these self-made millionaires came from, and the gilded European luxury they had climbed into. Isidore Straus, who, with his brother, built Macy's into the greatest store in the world, had started with far less than he ended with. A man like that, eating warm cornbread on the finest ship afloat, was eating his whole life story in a single golden square. It was homely food, and it was there on purpose, because White Star knew exactly who was in the room. Number 14. Soda scones. Off the griddle again came soda scones, the soft, flat, quick-cooked scones of Scotland and Ireland, raised with baking soda and buttermilk instead of yeast, and cooked on a hot iron rather than baked. They came to the table warm and pillowy, faintly tangy, ready to be split and spread with butter that melted straight into the crumb. Unlike the sweet scones of afternoon tea, soda scones were a breakfast bread, plain and filling, the kind that fed working families across the British Isles for generations. On Titanic, they sat beside fine imported preserves, so a passenger could tear one open, layer it with black currant conserve, and taste the whole contrast of the ship in one bite. Peasant bread and aristocratic jam on the same warm plate. The galley turned them out by the hundreds each morning, carried out steaming, because on this ship even the simplest bread arrived fresh and was never allowed to cool. Second pattern break. Here is something the movies never quite capture. This breakfast was not the only place first-class passengers could eat. Titanic carried a separate a la carte restaurant, decked in French walnut and gilded bronze, so exclusive and so beautiful that people called it the Ritz. Passengers who dined there paid extra, on top of fares that already cost fortunes. The most expensive suites went for around £870, which in the money of the day was more than $4,000, at a time when a good annual salary might be a few hundred. These were people for whom breakfast was not merely a meal, but a performance, a daily proof of arrival. Everything you have heard about so far, the kidneys, the bloaters, the French honey, existed inside a machine built to make the wealthy feel like the center of the universe. And for 4 days, floating on the flattest, calmest sea anyone aboard had ever seen, it worked perfectly. Number 13. Sultana scones, the sweeter cousin of the soda scone. The Sultana scone was studded with sultanas, the pale, golden raisins the British prized above the darker kind. Baked rather than griddled, these were richer, a little cakier, dotted with sweet, chewy fruit that caramelized at the edges. They blurred the line between breakfast and the tea table, which was exactly the point. On a leisurely morning at sea, with nowhere to be and nothing to do but promenade the deck and gossip in the lounges, a passenger could linger over coffee and a sultana scone the way a person lingers over a small, perfect luxury. And that was what first-class breakfast on the Titanic was really about. Not survival, not fuel, pleasure, unhurried and total, for people who had every reason to believe the morning would go on forever. Number 12, Vienna rolls, now to the breadbasket, and its finest resident, the Vienna roll. These were the crisp, glossy white rolls made by the Viennese method, where steam is injected into the oven so the crust turns thin and shattering while the inside stays soft and open. Vienna bread was considered the pinnacle of European baking, and its presence was a mark of real sophistication. The ship's bakers worked through the night to produce these fresh for each morning, because a stale Vienna roll was a wasted one, and White Star did not serve stale bread to men who owned railroads. Set in a silver basket beside the graham rolls and scones, the Vienna roll was Europe on a plate, refined, precise, and just a little vain, exactly like the world it was baked for. Number 11. Graham rolls. And right beside that vain little Vienna roll sat its earnest American opposite, the Graham roll. These were made from Graham flour, a coarse whole wheat named for Sylvester Graham, the American reformer who preached that unrefined bread was the path to virtue and vigor. By 1912, Graham flour had become the choice of the health-conscious, and offering these rolls was White Star's nod to passengers who believed brown bread was good for them. Denser and nuttier than the white rolls, with a faint sweetness and a hearty chew, they were the breakfast of the person who wanted to feel disciplined in the middle of unimaginable luxury. There was something almost funny about it. On a ship serving grilled kidneys and French honey and steak to order, some passengers still reached for the virtuous whole wheat roll, as if a little brown bread might balance the ledger. They were baked fresh like everything else, wholesome and dutiful beside their glamorous white neighbors in the same silver basket. Number 10. Narbonne honey. This is where the menu stopped being modest about its wealth. The honey served at first-class breakfast was not just any honey. It was Narbonne honey, named specifically on the menu, imported from the Narbonne region of southern France, where bees fed on wild rosemary to produce a honey so pale, so delicate, so floral, that it was considered among the finest in the world. Listing it by name was the whole point. Anyone could offer honey. Only a truly first-class establishment offered Narbonne honey, and made sure you knew it. Drizzled over a warm Vienna roll, it was mild and fragrant, with a subtle perfume of rosemary and sun-baked hillside, utterly unlike the ordinary honey most people knew. That little dish of pale gold had traveled from the south of France to Southampton, to the middle of the North Atlantic, just so a millionaire could taste the flowers of Provence on his morning bread. It was a small thing, and it was the entire philosophy of the ship in one spoonful. Nothing was too far, nothing was too much. Number 9. Black currant conserve. Alongside the extravagant French honey sat the deep, dark preserves, and finest among them was black currant conserve. Black currants, small, tart, intensely flavored berries, cooked down into a jam so dark it is nearly black, with a rich wine-like sharpness that stands up to butter and bread without disappearing. In Britain, black currant conserve was a beloved breakfast preserve, valued for its bracing tartness and its deserved reputation for being packed with what we now call vitamin C. Spread thick on a warm scone, it cut through the morning richness with a jolt of dark fruit. It was less about spectacle than the Narbonne honey, and more about quiet quality. the kind of preserve you would find in the finest homes in London. On a Sunday morning in the middle of the ocean, it tasted of English gardens and long summer afternoons that most of these passengers assumed they had many more of ahead of them. Number 8. Oxford marmalade. No British breakfast, however grand, was complete without marmalade, and the marmalade of the finest tables was Oxford marmalade. The thick-cut, bittersweet Seville orange preserve made famous by Sarah Jane Cooper, whose husband Frank sold it from their shop in Oxford. Dark amber, shot through with chewy ribbons of orange peel, it was prized precisely for its bitterness, an adult, sophisticated flavor that balanced the sweet honeys and conserves on the table. A passenger spread it on cold toast, because the toast had to be cold and crisp for the marmalade to sit properly, and got that unmistakable Edwardian combination of sweet, bitter, and sharp all at once. It was the taste that meant breakfast to the British upper class more than almost anything else. To find Oxford marmalade in a silver dish on the Titanic was to find the entire ritual of the English morning transported intact onto the sea. Some things, they believed, should never change. That, too, was about to be tested. Third pattern break. Now think for a moment about the men and women lifting these spoons. At these tables sat some of the wealthiest people on earth. John Jacob Astor IV, whose fortune could have bought the ship many times over, ate here with his young pregnant wife. Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to a mining empire, dined in style. He would abandon that very night when he changed into evening dress and declared he was prepared to go down like a gentleman. Isidor Straus, the Macy's owner, ate beside his wife Ida, who would refuse a lifeboat rather than leave him. George Widener, Charles Hayes, the great and powerful of two continents, all started that final Sunday over the same silver, the same warm rolls, the same Oxford marmalade. Within 18 hours, more than 1,500 people aboard would be dead in the freezing water, and a great many were the very ones who had lingered longest over this beautiful breakfast. They did not know. That is the thing you can never quite get past. They simply did not know. Number 7. Grilled ham and sausage. For all the delicacies, the heart of a first-class breakfast was still hearty, familiar meat, and grilled ham and sausage anchored the plate for passengers who wanted a real, substantial start to the day. Thick slices of cured ham, grilled until the edges caught and crisped, sat beside plump sausages browned and split and sizzling. This was food most Americans had never tasted at quite this level of quality. Cured and prepared to a standard ordinary hotels could not match. A man could build his whole breakfast around it, ham and sausage and eggs and a Vienna roll, and rise from the table fortified for a day of walking the decks and reading in the lounge. It was unpretentious in a way the bloaters and the Narbonne honey were not, the reliable center of the meal, the food you actually filled up on. In the enormous galley, sides of ham and links of sausage were cooked in staggering quantities each morning, because even millionaires, at the end of the day, wanted a good plate of grilled meat with their coffee. Number 6. Lamb collops. Here was another word from a vanished world, collops. A collop was simply a thin slice of meat, and lamb collops were tender cuts of young lamb, sliced thin, seasoned, and grilled quickly to order, so they stayed juicy inside. In the Edwardian dining room, having meat cooked fresh to order at breakfast was a luxury in itself, and lamb collops were a lighter, more refined choice than a full chop. They arrived still hissing, edges caramelized, the interior blushing pink, served with a little watercress or grilled tomato. The word itself was already old-fashioned in 1912, inherited from centuries of English cooking, and its presence on the menu carried a whiff of tradition the modern passengers found reassuring. Ordering lamb collops for breakfast was the sort of thing a person did to feel connected to a long line of gentry who had eaten the same way for generations. On this ship of new money and new technology, a little old world vocabulary went a long way. Number 5. Cold meats. Set out along the sideboard for those who wanted them were the cold meats, an array of sliced cold cuts, pressed tongue, galantines, and cold roasts, arranged and garnished with the precision of a still life painting. Cold meats at breakfast were a mark of abundance, food left from grander preparations, sliced thin and presented as a casual luxury for anyone who preferred something lighter. A passenger with a delicate morning appetite could take a few slices of cold ham or tongue with a leaf of watercress and a Vienna roll and call it breakfast. The point was choice, the sheer, overwhelming range of it. You did not have to want anything in particular. You simply surveyed the possibilities laid before you and selected. That freedom, the freedom to have exactly what you felt like at any given moment, was the truest luxury on the Titanic, more than any single dish. It was the feeling of a world arranged entirely for your convenience, a feeling these passengers had spent their whole lives paying to preserve. Number 4. Grilled tomatoes and sauté potatoes. Every great breakfast needs its supporting cast, and here they were, the grilled tomatoes and the potatoes done 3 ways, mashed, sautéed, and in their jackets. The tomatoes were halved and grilled until the edges blistered and the insides went soft and sweet and jammy, a bright, acidic counterpoint to all the grilled meat and smoked fish. The sauté potatoes were sliced and fried golden and crisp in the galley's pans, while jacket potatoes came baked whole in their skins, and mashed potatoes arrived smooth and buttery for those who wanted comfort. These were the humble anchors of the plate, the vegetables and starches that turned a collection of delicacies into an actual filling meal. Even here, in the simplest corner of the menu, the execution was flawless, because the whole promise of first class was that nothing, not even a grilled tomato, would ever be less than perfect. And that Sunday morning, it never was. 4th pattern break. Consider the machine behind all of this. To serve breakfasts like these, along with lunches and multi-course dinners, 3 or 4 times over for more than 2,000 people, Titanic sailed with a mountain of provisions loaded at Southampton, tens of thousands of eggs, tons of fresh meat, poultry, and fish packed in the ship's refrigerated rooms, thousands of pounds of fresh vegetables, crates of fruit, oceans of milk and cream, all of it stored, iced, and rationed to arrive fresh across an entire Atlantic crossing. An army of cooks, bakers, butchers, and stewards worked around the clock to make it all appear effortless and gleaming on the tables above. And it kept working right up until the end. Stewards served, cooks cooked, and the great machine of first-class comfort ran flawlessly through that final Sunday, right up until roughly 20 minutes before midnight, when the machine and the illusion and the ship all struck ice. Number 3. Sirloin steak and mutton chops to order. This is the entry that tells you everything. At the very top of the breakfast menu sat the ultimate privilege of first-class travel. Sirloin steak and mutton chops cooked to order, not chosen from a buffet, not portioned out by a steward, cooked individually, exactly the way you asked, the moment you asked for it. A passenger could sit down and order a thick sirloin steak grilled to his precise preference at 8 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the ocean, and it would arrive within minutes, seared and rested on warm china. That was the real luxury of the Titanic, not any single ingredient, but total command over your own experience. The ability to summon a perfect steak from a kitchen staff whose entire purpose was your satisfaction. It was the food of men used to giving orders and watching them instantly obeyed. Astor could have his steak, Guggenheim could have his chop. And on the morning of April 14, 1912, the kitchen delivered, one perfect plate at a time, to men who had no idea they were being served their last. Number 2, eggs to order and omelets. Just below the steak, in that same realm of personal service, came the EGGS, and there were more ways to have them than most passengers had ever imagined. Fried, shirred, poached, and boiled, cooked to whatever softness you liked, plus omelets made plain or folded around fresh tomato. Eggs are the most ordinary food in the world, which is exactly what made this such a quiet marvel. Anyone could have an egg, but to have your egg cooked precisely to order, fresh from stores, kept cold across the entire voyage, whipped into a tender tomato omelet, or poached to a trembling softness on buttered toast, by a kitchen that treated your preference as a command that was first class distilled to its purest form, the everyday made flawless, the humble made personal. A passenger could ask for a soft-boiled egg with the same casual confidence he would use at home, and it would arrive perfect, because on this ship, perfection in small things was the whole point. It was the taste of a world that answered when you called. Number 1, coffee. And at the very center of it all, poured hot from a silver pot into a fine china cup, was coffee. Sounds like nothing. It was everything. Coffee was the thread that ran through the entire meal, the first thing many passengers reached for, and the last thing they lingered over. The warm, dark, bitter constant that framed every bite of steak and scone and marmalade. In the great domed saloon, with the flat, calm sea sliding past the portholes and the low murmur of wealthy conversation filling the room, a cup of coffee was the small, ordinary comfort that made a spectacular breakfast feel human. It was the pause between courses, the reason to stay a little longer at the table, the sip you took while deciding whether the morning held anything worth hurrying for. For these passengers, on this Sunday, it did not. There was no hurry. There was only the coffee, and the light on the water, and the whole leisurely day still ahead. Somewhere out in that calm, beautiful sea, an iceberg was already waiting. But for now, the cup was warm, the ship was steady, and the last morning of their lives tasted like fresh coffee and everything money could buy. Here is my challenge. Pick one of these and try it this week. The baked apple, the Finnan haddock, the Oxford marmalade on cold toast, the steak to order. Then sit down and eat it slowly the way they did on a calm morning with nowhere to be. Because these were not just foods. They were the last ordinary pleasures of people who believed, right up until midnight, that the morning would go on forever. Drop the one you would try in the comments. I want to know if the grilled kidneys get braver takers than the bloaters, and whether anyone's family has a story from that ship. Some meals are worth remembering. This was the last one they ever had.